Hello, good evening, good morning, good afternoon, good whatever time of night or day it happens to be, wherever you happen to be. I am Liviana, and this is my channel. Now, Liviana is not my real name, but my pen name, and the choice and meaning of that name I have explained elsewhere. My real name is Giovanna, as some of you already know. It is an Italian name, the Italian form of Joan, as in Joan Jett, or Joan Collins, or Joan Crawford, or whatever. I am formally trained in philosophy and religion, with some lesser formal training in modern and ancient languages, linguistics, history, and music. I had a very brief, almost career in academia, which was cut short before it ever really got started due to physical health issues, which eventually left me homebound for about 7 years, during which time I read a lot, watched a lot of television and movies, and played a lot of games on my computer. So I have been active in one way or another in politics for most of my adult life, apart from that 7-year period and a later foray into the gaming industry. I am not a developer per se, although I have done some coding and I have written some lore. The lore was for a game which has never yet been published, unfortunately. If it ever should be published, I will happily tell you all what the game is. But until such time, it is the project of a friend of mine with whom I used to work, and I will leave any first announcement or whatever to him, and he can talk about it to his content, but I'm not going to step on his toes. Most of what I did in the gaming industry was customer service and forum moderation, but I did a good amount also of what might be called alpha testing, which we just called testing. The company itself referred to it as quality assurance, and this was back in the days when gaming companies actually had people on staff to do such things. Now they generally have players given access to test servers to do what's known as beta testing. So there's that. Little bit of my history there. I have been a gamer since the mid-1970s, starting with Atari and games like Pong and I can't remember the exact name, but it was a variation on Pong which had a fortress in each of the 4 corners of the screen. You used the paddle in front of your fortress to deflect the Pong ball away from your fortress and toward one of the other 3. If the ball hit the fortress wall, it destroyed a pixel, and I think there were 3 levels of pixels forming the wall on 2 sides of each fortress, and a little stronghold inside. I want to say the name of the game was something like Romance of the 3 Kingdoms, or Romancing the 3 Kingdoms, or something like that. I've also been told it might have been called Warlords, but I seem to remember Romance of the 3 Kingdoms, or some title similar to that. But all the games I can find online by that name, or mentioned online, talked about online, that have that name or are associated with that name came out quite a bit later. Now, my brother had this game back in the 1970s, and he remembers it too. He can even picture the game on the screen as I've described it, but he can't remember the name either. Anyway, when the first hardback rulebooks were coming out for first edition AD&D, starting in 1977, I started getting into D&D, Dungeons and Dragons, and then when the Player's Handbook and the Dungeon Master's Guide and all the main core rulebooks for Advanced Dungeons and Dragons were out, I got into that. I've played and run a number of tabletop RPGs, that is, role-playing games, and the occasional text-based chat room role-play some years later, as well as things like the original Bard's Tale back in the 1980s. I've also played MUDs, multi-user dungeons, and single-player computer games. In fact, one of the games I worked on, one of the companies I was with, what we worked on was a MUD. I've also played single-player computer games, then some with a multiplayer option, and finally MMORPGs, and I still occasionally will play a single-player game or a game with a multiplayer option that isn't quite a massively multiplayer online game. I've never been much for first-person shooter games. I did have the original Wolfenstein, or Wolfenstein, if you will, back in the early 90s. And I played another briefly sometime around, I'd say 2007, 2008, or somewhere around then. One of my favorite games for a long time, back before I got into online gaming, was Knights of the Sky, which was a World War I fighter pilot flying ace type game. Loved it. Logged probably thousands of hours in that flight simulator, basically. I am also a trekker, and I have been since, 1966, although I was too young at that time to have any say in what the family watched on television. But Star Trek has been a part of my life ever since. So there's a little bit about me and my credentials. And now as to what I will be talking about in or on this channel, in the videos on this channel, well, it will be a bit random. I will certainly talk about social, political, and economic matters a bit, as well as philosophy, logic, and worldview. I may talk about languages and or aspects of linguistics. I'll probably talk about Romulan history and culture, and a bit about the Romulan language, which was created by Diane Duane and has been developed further by fans since the original creation of the language. I might stream some live gameplay from Star Trek Online or other games. I will also be interviewing some people about various things, including some of the subjects I have just talked about, and the subject which I'm about to talk about, what I'm about to mention, and that is Gamergate. I will talk about Gamergate as well, which, contrary to what you may have heard, is not in any way a hate group, nor a collection of trolls, sexists, racists, homophobes, transphobes, or the like. Rather, Gamergate, originally the name Gamergate was the name of the scandals that were being talked about and protested. But over time, the term Gamergate has come to refer to the people who were involved in this, what is most accurately described as a consumer revolt. Now, these people have been unfairly smeared by the very games media whose corruption these gamers were protesting, and subsequently smeared by the mainstream media, which, unlike what journalists are supposed to do, did not do their own research to find out what Gamergate was about, but simply regurgitated the narrative of the video games media. And there was no attempt made to distinguish between the various factions of Gamergate, nor to take note that some of the supposed bad actors were regarded by the mainstream of Gamergate as excommunicate, to borrow a term. So there you have my channel intro, and I will end with my customary benediction before, right after I beam up to my V11 Stormbird and warp out. And my customary benediction is, have fun, but stay safe. This is Liviana, signing off.